When you hear Great Depression, what comes to mind? Probably stock market crashes, right? Breadlines. We tend to think of it as this big, sweeping economic crisis. But what we're going to talk about today is the human side of that crisis, because it landed hard on the shoulders of the most vulnerable people imaginable, an entire generation of kids. And for them, life was never, ever going to be the same.
And really, that's the core of it. This isn't just a story about a tough time. The Great Depression didn't just interrupt childhood for millions of kids, it completely rewrote the rulebook. The whole idea of what it meant to be a child in America was fundamentally changed by what happened in the 1930s.
All right, so here's how we're going to break this story down. First, we'll look at what life was like before everything changed. Then, we'll see what happened when the floor vanished. We'll get into how childhood was put to work, look at the scars left behind, and finally, talk about the incredible legacy this generation created.
Okay, so let's dive right into that first part. To really get how huge this change was, we have to set the scene, right? We need a before picture. So what was it actually like to be a kid in America before the whole world turned upside down? Well, for a lot of kids, life had this simple, predictable rhythm. You know the drill. You went to school, you played outside with your friends, and you didn't really have to worry about where dinner was coming from. Your parents handled it. But the most important thing, the thing everyone just took for granted, was this feeling of stability. The sense that the world was solid beneath your feet.
And then, poof, almost overnight, that solid ground just vanished. It's like the floor fell out from under everyone. And that brings us to the shockwave, the immediate impact of the crash as it went from a headline about Wall Street to a crisis in every single kitchen in America.
And just look at this contrast. It shows you how deeply personal this whole thing got, and how fast. This wasn't some abstract economic theory on the news. No, this was suddenly not having money for lunch. It was looking at your mom and dad, your protectors, and seeing pure worry on their faces for the very first time. For a kid, that's your whole world turning upside down, right then and there.
Yeah, losing stuff was hard, but the biggest change, the one that really stuck, it was psychological. That sense of safety, of security, it was gone. And in its place was this constant low hum of anxiety. Kids are like sponges. They soak up the emotions around them. And the fear and uncertainty filling their homes became a part of them, something they'd carry forever.
So when that foundation is gone, what's left? Survival. That's it. That becomes priority number one. And this is where we see one of the biggest shifts of the whole era. Play was out, and responsibility was in. Childhood itself, well, it was put to work.
Think about it. Education. That's supposed to be the ticket to a better future, right? Suddenly, it was a luxury most families just couldn't afford anymore. When you're worried about tonight's dinner, the long-term benefit of school just doesn't stack up against the immediate need for another person earning a few pennies. So dreams got put on hold, and for so many, they were just gone.
And these weren't your typical chores, like taking out the trash. No way. We're talking about immense adult responsibilities. Kids were thrown into the deep end of the labor world. They were working brutal hours on farms, hawking newspapers on street corners, even taking dangerous jobs in factories. Or they became little parents themselves, taking care of younger brothers and sisters so their own parents could go out and desperately look for work.
Now, you can't go through something that intense, that relentless, without it leaving a mark. And that brings us to the cost of all this. We've talked about the external struggles, the work, but now let's look at the internal wounds, the scars that these kids would carry with them for the rest of their lives.
And the damage was really twofold, hitting both body and mind. Physically, you had malnutrition from not having enough to eat. It stunted their growth, made them sick. These were health problems that followed them into adulthood. But the emotional damage was just as deep. Imagine living with a constant fear of being poor again, a fear that just never goes away. Or feeling guilty, as a little kid, for just being a burden, another mouth to feed. It was a complete and total loss of innocence.
And that's the thing. For this generation, the depression didn't just end when the stock market got better. No, it was baked into them. It was part of their DNA. They grew up to be adults who were shaped to their very core by scarcity and fear. They became a generation of incredibly cautious survivors.
But, and this is a really important but, that's not where their story ends. Because out of all that pain, all that hardship, something incredible was forged. A legacy. So for our last section, let's look at how these survivors, the kids who went through the absolute worst of it, ended up building the future of America.
What they went through instilled a set of values in them that is, what's legendary? You know this generation. Number one, hard work was everything. It was the answer to almost any problem.
Number 2, they absolutely hated waste. I mean, you did not throw something away if it could be fixed or used for something else. And number 3, save, save, save. Because they knew firsthand what it was like to have absolutely nothing. They saved every penny they could.
And this is where it all comes together. Why does this matter to the rest of us? Because that mindset, that incredible discipline, that resilience, that insane work ethic, that became the engine for America's massive economic boom after World War II. Think about that. The very same generation that survived the country's worst economic crisis went on to build the most prosperous society the world had ever seen.
It's just this incredible paradox when you think about it. Their childhood was stolen, sacrificed to an economic collapse, but in its place, something else was created. Something was forged in that fire, this unbreakable, resilient spirit, a generation that simply refused to give up. And so, it leaves us with this huge question, doesn't it? How does the struggle of just one generation end up redefining a whole nation's future? Their story is just such a powerful reminder that the things people go through, the pain, the survival, the values they learn, it doesn't just fade away. It echoes through time, reshaping everything that comes after.